If all you do is come to church to consume, even consume the word, to do what you want to do, get what you want to get, come when you want to come, God said, all you're doing is coming in theme. Let me tell you what we used to call it when I played ball. We used to call it when a guy didn't hold up to his own stuff, he didn't work out hard, and you saw it when he got on the field, he could barely breathe, out of shape, passing out, cramping up, missing tackles. You know what we tell him? You're cheating the program. You're cheating the program. Why? Because we depend on every single guy that suits up and puts on a helmet. Whether you're on kickoff, return, I don't care if you're second string or third team. We count on everybody. And if you didn't pull your weight, you hurt the team. Cheating the program. I'll tell you what, in many churches, the program is being cheated. The tithing community is very small. 2.5% of people tithe. 2.5%. That's ridiculous. But all I can tell people is that, where are you? I can't worry about everybody. I can only worry about me. You can only worry about you. Where are you? Where are we as a church? I want to be a church that we're just not too much. I want to be a church we're moving up to 5% of the people. Maybe we can get to 10% of people, maybe 20, but 2.5% of people tithe. And as a matter of fact, the other people that call themselves tithing, they give about, guess what? 2.5%. Interesting. He says, shall a man rob God? You come to church to take and not be a giver as God has instructed, then the church becomes a place to buy and sell, a place of consumption only, instead of a place where growth, prosperity, healing, answered prayer, provisions in the house to do good work in and outside the community. So here's what we're leading up to. So verse 9, he says this, you are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. And then he says in 10, and this is where I'm going to make my points and we're done. I said all that to say to get to this verse 10. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive. Put the New Living Translation version up, please. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse so there will be enough food in my temple. If you do, says the Lord of heaven's armies, I will open the windows of heaven for you, and I will pour out a blessing so great you won't have enough room to take it in. Try it. Put me to the test. Here's point one. Well, before I get to point one, let me just say that word bring means to just empty out. Why is that important? I make the point simply because when you bring or you empty out, you know what it creates? It creates a place for you to be poured into. See, when you bring and you empty out what God has so graciously and lovingly given you, listen, you'll survive. Listen, he says that in order for me to fill you up like I want to, he said, you got to empty yourself out. Otherwise, I can't. Let me tell you, I get rid of all my stuff. I got a nice empty basket. I'm ready. I'm empty. I ain't going to look at my bank account. It's empty. God, fill it up. I'm ready to be filled up. Listen, he says this. He says, number one, point one, he says bring. Point one is listen, tithing is time honored and time sensitive. Tithing is time honored and time sensitive. Verse 6 says, for I am the Lord thy God. What did he say? I change not. It's time honored. It's not just for back then. It is for right now. And it's time sensitive. That is, it's bring it. It's an active. That word bring means to come back and forth, to empty out. In other words, it was literally people coming in back and forth to the temple every week. And what they had, they empty out, they go back to their places, their homes and work, they get more, and they come back, and they empty out. It is a constant flow, week to week, back and forth. See the correlation between the temple and how God set the temple up to worship? When we talked about that the priests were called to bring in the bread and set it there, what? Once a week, and so that they would put it before God, the offering before God, and God would cause it to be sustained and not grow stale for a whole week, and they would sit and eat it, and then every week they required to go and make fresh bread and bring bread. It was a constant flow of resources coming in and out. And that is what he wants us to do. He says it's both time-honored and time-sensitive. It means right now. Don't wait till a month ago and say, oh, I forgot my tithe 2 and 3 weeks ago. No, he says right now, every week, I got work to be done all the time. No time to stop. I ain't got time for you to decide when you're going to pay it and to get yourself together. Get it together. Oh, listen, after you give me mine. He said, and then, matter of fact, if you'll give me mine, I'll help you to get the rest of your stuff together. That's what he says he'll do. It's time honored and time sensitive. But number 2, it's also a test. He says, bring it all into my house. He says, and prove me now, saith the Lord of hosts. He says, it's a test. What's the test for? It's a test to test, not for God to test you, but this is the only time God says you can test him. Test me, he said. He said, I dare you. He's saying, I dare you to do it like I told you. And he said, I dare you. Test me. Watch me, the God of heaven and earth, the God who hung the moon and the stars, the God who raises the dead, the God who heals, the God who provides, the God who does everything, the God who keeps it together, keeps it all together when you don't have it together. It's that God that does it, and only God. He says, test me and watch me. Look what I'll do. He says, I'll pour you out, I'll open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing. That leads to point 3. There's a treasure. It's time sensitive and time honored. He said, there's a test. He said, you test me. I'm not testing you. He said, this is for you to test me. Man, I'm jumping at the chance to test God. He's not testing us in this case. We get to test him. And then he says, and if you do it, he said, there's a treasure at the end. He says, I'll open up the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there should not be room enough to receive it. But that gives me to point 4. There's a transfer. God has transferred his wealth for you to use at your discretion. He's given you all. And all he says is, listen, he said, it all belongs to me, but I'm giving you all of this, and all I'm asking you to give me 1/10 of this. He said, and now I'm transferring my wealth, not just to all that I give you for day to day, but I'm going to transfer the wealth so that when I put up the New Living Translation again for that, he said, I'm going to transfer the wealth towards you that what? That you won't have enough room to even take it all in. That's wealth, y'all. That's not just money. God says, I want to transfer wealth to you. But the problem is, and here we go, the problem is simply this. He said, verse 11, and look what he also do before we get to that. He said, I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast her fruit before the time in the field, saith the Lord of hosts. He said, I will hold back all the foolishness, because the enemy is trying to get at, listen, all that you have. He wants your family. He wants your faith. He wants to take away your faith in God. He wants your family. Listen, he wants your finances. He wants your money, because he understands that if you can get your money and he can get your money to do evil things, listen, it's not, you're not evil. Money's not, listen, the love of money is the root of all evil. And if we can take that money and put it in places that doesn't glorify God, then what he's done his job. And he's trying to take, he says, I will rebuke the devourer for your sake. Put up the New Living Translation version of that. And he says, I'll rebuke it, and then he said, tell you what he also does. Before, he said, destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast her fruit. He said, listen, what happens with most of us in our life is that we have an idea, a plan. We got this great laid plan of how we're going to move in life and do things, but many times it never reaches maturity. And it drops and it falls on the ground. We went to the apple orchard not too long ago, and because of the rain, the fruit, the good fruit, those good apples, many of them were on the ground. They had rotted because they had not reached maturity, and because of the rain, and they bore so much fruit, and they began to fall, but many apples did not reach maturity, and so it was wasted. And God says that the enemy is trying to keep you from reaching a maturity in your life, your money reaching maturity, your family reaching maturity, you having personal maturity in life. And he says, I will cast the enemy so that you can see the full possibilities of your life come to fruition, that you can have a glorious life, an exciting life. We're not called to live dull, mundane, ho-hum type of life. We ought to have fun. We ought to have joy. We ought to have money. We ought to be to do things. We ought to be to help people on a regular, not every once in a while. People need to eat every day, don't they? Y'all eat every day. There are people starving right now. There are people who are homeless right now. There are people who need our help right now. What are we going to do? And he says, all the nations shall call you blessed, for you shall be a delightful land, saith the Lord of hosts. And verse 13, your word, and then I'm going to skip 13 and 14 and go to 16. Then they feared the Lord, spake often one to another, and the Lord hearkened and heard it. And a book of remembrance was written before him for them that feared the Lord and thought upon his name. In other words, those people had said, they said, oh gosh, God, we mourn and we do all those things. And God said, God, will you remember us? The people that are doing it. Will you remember the people that do give? Will you remember the people that are being faithful? Will you remember? And he said, of course I remember. Matter of fact, he says, more importantly, he said, I got your name written in the Lamb's book of life over in Revelation. He said, I've written it down and nobody can take you out of my hand. You have a guaranteed inheritance and nobody can take it from me. But I'm telling you, I want to have an inheritance and live it and use it right here on earth. What good is it? You can't die with your money. Now, I'm not saying don't invest it. Don't be a good steward. I'm not saying don't have a retirement. I'm not saying don't save up and do it. Of course you should. Those are good principles. We've learned many of those principles. But at the end of the day, if all you care about is consuming for self, you've missed the mark. Shall a man rob God? We started out this whole series saying that God loves you. And he says, listen, I love you. Why do you steal from me? He says, how are we stolen? In tithes and offering. Let me read something to you and I'm closing. This is a true story, miracle of the groceries. In 1984, Mike and his family belonged to an East Coast church. One Sunday evening, the sermon was on sacrificial offerings, and a special offering was taken at the end of the sermon. The only money in Mike's wallet was a $50 bill, which was supposed to buy a week's worth of groceries for his wife and their 5 children and himself. However, in a move of faith, Mike put the $50 bill in the offering. Then, after the conclusion of the service, the family went out to the parking lot to go home. Within minutes, they joyfully returned to the sanctuary and asked the pastor to come outside and see their miracle. Somewhat skeptical, the pastor accompanied them outside to their 20-year-old station wagon. Peering through the windows, he saw that the interior of the vehicle was completely filled with bags of groceries. Happy for the family, he remarked that someone had given them a huge blessing. He said, you don't understand, Pastor, Mike said. Before service, I made sure that all the windows were rolled up and the doors were locked. I have the only key, so it must have been the Lord. To which the pastor added, giving truly is the only key to God's provision. Mike had no family living in the area. No one from the congregation ever claimed responsibility. And here were the witnesses by Reverend Robert Costa of Detroit, Michigan. And editors know this sounds exactly like Psalm 78:25, where men ate the bread of angels. He sent them all the food they could eat. Let me tell you something. If your trust is in your wallet and in your bank account, and if you can't hear from God when he says, listen, that was his $50 for his family's groceries. If you've ever been there, and I love being transparent because I just believe it helps, and I believe it can help people. We have been there in our own family where this is all we had, and God said, give it. And it seems crazy, but let me tell you, when it seems crazy and doesn't make sense, it's God. I'm telling you, you hear the Holy Spirit speaking on the inside, and I'm thinking, what is my wife going to think? And my wife knows I'm notorious for going somewhere and giving away the money that we have. Notorious. It happens. Not because, listen, I'm always open to give, but not because I say, who am I going to give today? But I'm always sensitive to God and him wanting to do something and use me. We always say we want to be used, but then we get tight and stingy when it comes to our money. Now, let me just say, we'll help put up some chairs, but if God said, empty your wallet today, right now, would you do it? This man did it. It's all he had. Nobody else had the key. People corroborated the story. Right there in some of our members' hometown of Detroit, Michigan, they had nothing. And God opened up the windows. You think they had more than $50 worth of groceries? Yeah. Room enough they couldn't receive. I bet the kids couldn't even fit in the car, but I bet they piled up on them groceries and rode home gladly. They riding up shotgun, holding on. They happy. Listen, happy are we when we will follow after what God says, have a heart to give, tithing and offering. Listen, it's time honored and time sensitive. Amen? Amen. Listen, I love God. I love God. Give the Lord a hand clap today.